Hello, fictional. Welcome to the What If Issei. Today we are gonna see what if Issei became the Dragon God Emperor. If you end up liking this video, please consider subscribe, so without further ado, let's get into the video. The battlefield was chaos, roars of dragons, the crackle of destructive magic, and the clang of swords against armor filled the air. Issei Haidu, covered in blood and sweat, stood amidst the carnage, his armor glowing with the faint red hue of Ddraig's power. His vision blurred as exhaustion tugged at his body, but he couldn't afford to stop. Not yet. The fate of his friends, his comrades, and the underworld itself hung in the balance. His opponent, an ancient dragon named Astaroth, loomed before him, a colossal beast with scales as black as night and eyes glowing with malice. Astaroth had been slumbering for millennia, waiting for the right moment to rise and claim dominion over all dragons. And now, having awakened, the ancient beast was on a rampage, destroying anything that stood in his path, including the armies of devils and angels alike. "You're weak, Red Dragon Emperor." Astaroth sneered, his voice echoing across the battlefield. "A mere pawn, clinging to the power of a fallen dragon. You are nothing compared to me." Issei gritted his teeth, gripping the boosted gear on his arm. He had already pushed Ddraig's power to its limit, his body feeling like it was on the verge of collapse. Even in his balance breaker form, he was barely holding his own against the ancient beast. Every attack he launched was countered with overwhelming force. Every defense he mounted was shattered like glass. But as Astaroth charged, his massive form blotting out the sky, something deep within Issei stirred, a presence that had been dormant for far too long. He felt a surge of energy, unlike anything he had ever experienced before. It wasn't just Ddraig's power, it was something more. Something ancient, primal, and godlike. Partner Ddraig's voice echoed in Issei's mind, filled with both awe and concern. "This power, it's not mine. It's coming from you." Before Issei could respond, Astaroth's claw descended, aiming to crush him into the earth. With a reflex he didn't know he had, Issei raised his hand, and a barrier of golden energy flared to life, stopping the attack cold. Astaroth recoiled in shock, and so did Issei. "What was that?" Issei muttered, staring at his hand in disbelief. The golden energy pulsed around him, spreading from his fingers, enveloping his body in a shimmering aura. It felt familiar, yet completely foreign at the same time. You dare wield that power?" Astaroth roared, his voice tinged with something Issei hadn't heard before: fear. The ancient dragon took a step back, his eyes narrowing in recognition. "That's impossible," Astaroth growled. "Only the dragon gods possess such a force." Issei barely had time to process what Astaroth was saying before the power within him surged again, this time more violently. His boosted gear began to glow brighter, shifting from its usual crimson to a radiant gold. The energy around him intensified, and suddenly, Ddraig's voice came through clear, almost panicked. "Partner. Listen to me. This is the power of the Dragon God Emperor. If you don't control it, it will consume you." Issei's heart raced. Dragon God Emperor? He had heard of the dragon gods, beings like Great Red and Office, entities far beyond the understanding of mere mortals or even devils. But this was something different. This was power on a scale that could rival even them. "I don't understand." Issei shouted, the energy swirling around him like a violent storm. "What's happening to me?" "Your potential," Ddraig replied, his voice steadying. "It was always there, hidden deep within. When we first bonded, I sensed it, but I didn't know how far it would go. But now you're not just the Red Dragon Emperor, Issei. You're something more." Astaroth, realizing the threat before him, let out a furious roar and charged once again, but this time, Issei didn't falter. He could feel the energy of the Dragon God Emperor flowing through him, filling every fiber of his being. His body moved on instinct, faster and more powerful than ever before. With a single motion, he raised his hand and unleashed a wave of golden fire that collided with Astaroth's attack, obliterating it in an instant. The ancient dragon howled in pain, his massive form engulfed in the golden flames. Issei didn't stop there. He could feel the power urging him on, pushing him to finish the battle. He soared into the sky, his wings glowing with the same radiant energy, and with one final roar, he summoned all of the Dragon God Emperor's might into his hand. "Dragon God Emperor's judgment." Issei shouted, his voice echoing across the battlefield as a massive sphere of golden energy formed in his palm. With a swift motion, he hurled it toward Astaroth, the sheer force of it shaking the very ground beneath them. The sphere collided with the ancient dragon, and in a blinding flash of light, Astaroth was no more. Silence fell over the battlefield as the energy dissipated, leaving nothing but the charred remains of the once great dragon. Issei hovered in the air, panting heavily, the golden aura slowly fading from his body. He descended to the ground, his legs giving out beneath him as exhaustion finally took over. "What just happened?" he whispered, staring at his hands in disbelief. "You've awakened, partner," Ddraig said, his voice soft but proud. "You're no longer just the Red Dragon Emperor. You've ascended to something far greater, the Dragon God Emperor." Issei's heart pounded in his chest as the weight of Ddraig's words sank in. The Dragon God Emperor, what did that mean? How would it change his life? His relationships with Rias, Akeno, Asia, and the others. Before he could dwell on it further, he felt a familiar presence behind him. Turning his head, Issei saw Rias running toward him, her face filled with worry and relief. "Issei," she called, her voice trembling. "Are you okay?" Issei managed a weak smile as she knelt beside him, cradling his head in her arms. "I'm fine," he whispered. "But I think everything's about to change." And he was right. The power he had just unleashed would send shockwaves through the entire supernatural world. But for now, all he could do was hold on to the woman he loved and prepare for the storm that was sure to come. The morning sun barely pierced through the thick clouds hanging over the Grimmery mansion, casting long shadows across the grand halls. Issei sat in the large living room, his mind racing with the events from the previous day. He had defeated Astaroth, but at what cost? The Dragon God Emperor's power that had surged within him was unlike anything he had ever felt before. Even now, he could feel its residual strength flowing through his veins, humming quietly beneath the surface. But with great power came great responsibility and great fear. Rias entered the room, her crimson hair flowing behind her like a silken curtain. Her face was soft, but Issei could see the concern etched in her eyes. She sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. The warmth of her presence calmed him, even though he knew the storm of questions would soon follow. "Issei, I've spoken to Surziches. He wants to meet with you." Ria's voice was calm, but there was an underlying tension. "The others want to know what happened, they felt it, Issei. The power you unleashed was felt by the entire underworld and beyond." Issei sighed, leaning back against the couch. He knew this was coming. How could they not feel it? The battle with Astaroth had shaken the supernatural world to its core. He had gone beyond what any Red Dragon Emperor before him had ever achieved. And now, the leaders of the factions would come calling. "I don't even know what to tell them," Rias, Issei admitted, his hand clenching into a fist. "I barely understand what happened myself. One moment I'm fighting Astaroth, and the next, I'm tapping into this godlike power. Ddraig said I've become the Dragon God Emperor, but what does that even mean?" Rias placed her hand on his, her touch gentle. "We'll figure this out together, Issei. You're not alone in this. You never will be." He looked into her eyes, seeing the love and trust that had been built between them through countless battles and trials. It was that bond that had kept him grounded through everything. But now, as the Dragon God Emperor, he wasn't sure if even that would be enough. The sudden knock at the door broke the silence, and Akeno, dressed in her usual shrine maiden attire, entered the room. She, too, carried the same look of concern as Rias. "Issei," she began softly, "Azazel is here. He wants to speak with you. He said it's urgent." Issei nodded, already knowing this was inevitable. Azazel, the leader of the fallen angels and one of Issei's greatest allies, had always taken a keen interest in the power Issei wielded. But now, things had escalated beyond even Azazel's expectations. "I'll see him," Issei said, standing up, though his legs still felt weak from the battle. Rias and Akeno both gave him reassuring smiles as he walked toward the door. Despite the uncertainty that loomed ahead, their presence gave him strength. In the grand foyer of the Grimmery mansion, Azazel stood waiting, his arms crossed as he leaned against the wall. His sharp eyes locked onto Issei the moment he entered, and a smirk played at the corner of his lips, though there was a seriousness behind it that Issei hadn't seen before. Well, if it isn't the newly minted Dragon God Emperor himself," Azazel said, his tone light, but edged with curiosity. "You know, Issei, I've seen a lot of crazy things in my time, but you never cease to surprise me." Issei scratched the back of his head, feeling awkward under Azazel's gaze. "I didn't exactly ask for this, you know." Azazel pushed himself off the wall and walked toward Issei, his expression softening. "I know, kid. But what happened out there was monumental. The power you unleashed wasn't just some fluke. This is on a godly level, and you know what that means, right?" Issei nodded slowly. "The factions are going to want answers." "More than answers," Azazel said, his voice lowering. "They're going to want to know if you're a threat or an ally. You've essentially become a god, Issei. And gods don't come without consequences." Issei felt a chill run down his spine. The idea of being seen as a threat terrified him. He had always fought to protect those he cared about, not to become some kind of deity lording over others. But now, he had to face the reality that his power could be seen as dangerous, even if he didn't want it to be. "Surziches has called a summit," Azazel continued. "The leaders of all factions will be there, devils, angels, fallen angels, and even a few rogue dragons. They want to discuss what happens next." Rias stepped forward, her voice firm. "Issei won't be going alone. I'll be with him, and so will the rest of us." Azazel nodded. "I wouldn't expect anything less. But Issei, you need to be careful. There are those who won't see you as the same person anymore. You're not just the Red Dragon Emperor. You're something else now." Something bigger. Issei clenched his fists, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on him. I don't want to be some god that everyone fears. I just want to protect the people I care about. Azazel smiled faintly. That's exactly what makes you different, Issei. But the world doesn't always see things that way. Later that day, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Issei found himself standing on the balcony of the mansion, staring out at the twilight sky. The weight of his newfound power was heavy on his shoulders, and the summit loomed on the horizon, threatening to pull him into a storm of politics and power struggles he wasn't prepared for. But as the night air cooled his skin, he felt a familiar warmth at his side. Riaz had joined him, her arm slipping around his. You'll be okay, Issei, she whispered, resting her head on his shoulder. No matter what happens, we'll face it together. Issei smiled softly, grateful for her unwavering support. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that the path ahead was going to be far more dangerous than anything they had faced before. In the distance, the moon began to rise, casting a silver light over the landscape. As Issei gazed at it, he felt the Dragon God Emperor's power stirring within him once more, a quiet reminder that this was only the beginning. The world was changing, and so was he. But no matter what came next, Issei knew one thing for certain. He would protect those he loved, even if it meant embracing the godlike power within him. And if the faction saw him as a threat, well, he would deal with that when the time came. For now, all he could do was prepare for the battle ahead both within himself and with the world around him. The air was thick with tension as Issei, Riaz, and the rest of the Grimoire peerage made their way toward the summit. The grand chamber where the meeting was being held was deep within the underworld, a neutral ground that had been used for centuries for high-level negotiations between the factions. Issei's heart pounded in his chest as they approached the massive doors carved with ancient runes. He knew this wasn't just another meeting. This was a gathering of the most powerful beings in existence, the devils, angels, fallen angels, and even dragons. And now, they were all waiting to judge him. Riaz walked beside him, her hand lightly brushing his. Though she didn't speak, the silent support she offered calmed him. Behind them, Akeno, Asia, Kaneko, Zenobia, and the others followed, their faces filled with determination. Issei wasn't facing this alone, and that gave him the strength to keep going. The doors swung open, revealing the grand hall within. Issei's breath caught in his throat as he took in the sight before him. Seated at a massive round table were the most powerful leaders of the supernatural world. Surzich's Lucifer, the Devil King, sat at the head, his crimson eyes locking onto Issei the moment he entered. To his left was Michael, the leader of the angels, his golden wings folded behind him as he watched the newcomers with calm curiosity. On the other side sat Azazel, leader of the fallen angels, leaning back in his chair with a thoughtful smirk, his eyes gleaming with interest. But it wasn't just them. There were others, figures Issei didn't recognize immediately, but their power was undeniable. Dragons. Office, the Ouroboros dragon, stood silently in the corner, her eyes unreadable. Next to her was Great Red, the dragon of dragons, watching with mild amusement, as if the whole situation was a game to him. Issei's heart pounded. This was it. As they stepped into the room, Surzich's rose to his feet. Issei Haidu, he began, his voice calm but carrying the weight of authority. You've been summoned here today not as the Red Dragon Emperor, but as something far greater. The power you unleashed in your battle against Astaroth has been felt by every corner of the supernatural world. We are here to understand what has happened and what it means for the balance of power. Issei swallowed hard, his eyes flicking around the room. Everyone's gaze was fixed on him, waiting for answers. He didn't know what to say. What could he say? He barely understood it himself. Azazel was the first to speak. Issei, kid, you've always been full of surprises, but even I didn't expect this. You've tapped into something ancient, something beyond even Ddraig. The Dragon God Emperor, it's more than just a title. It's a mantle of power that's only been rumored in the deepest myths. Great Red chuckled from his corner. Ah, yes. The Dragon God Emperor, a power that rivals even the gods themselves. Though it seems our boy here didn't exactly choose this path, did he? Issei felt the weight of their words pressing down on him. He didn't want this kind of power. He hadn't asked for it. All he wanted was to protect his friends, to live a life with Riaz and the others. But now, he was being pulled into something far bigger than he could have ever imagined. I didn't ask for this, Issei said, his voice quieter than he intended. I don't want to be some god that everyone fears. I just want to protect the people I care about. Michael nodded, his gaze softening. That is a noble sentiment, Issei. But the power you now possess is far beyond what most can comprehend. It will change the way the world views you and the way you must view yourself. Surzich's stepped forward, his face thoughtful. Issei, you've always been a friend to us, a hero to the devils. But this new power, it places you in a position of authority, whether you want it or not. The factions will look to you for leadership. Some will fear you. Others will try to manipulate you. And some will see you as a threat. Issei felt a chill run down his spine. He had always fought to protect, never to rule. But now, it seemed like the world was demanding something more from him. Was he ready for that? Before he could respond, Office, the Ouroboros dragon, stepped forward, her voice calm and measured. You are not alone in this, Issei Haidu. You have the power of a dragon god now, yes. But power is not the only thing that defines a ruler. Great Red grinned, his sharp teeth glinting. Indeed. Power is just the beginning. The question is, what are you going to do with it? Issei's mind raced. The dragon god emperor, he still didn't fully understand what that meant. But he knew one thing. He didn't want to be a tyrant. He didn't want to rule through fear. That wasn't who he was. I don't want to rule over anyone, Issei said, his voice steady now. I'm not interested in being a god that forces others to bow to me. I just want to protect the people I care about. If this power helps me do that, then I'll use it. But I won't let it change who I am. There was a brief silence, and then Azazel let out a low chuckle. Spoken like a true hero. But Issei, whether you like it or not, you're now on a whole new playing field. You've got the power to reshape the world. The factions are going to have to adjust to that. Surziches nodded in agreement. Azazel is right. You've always fought for peace, Issei. But now, the balance of power has shifted. We can't ignore that. Issei felt the weight of their words, but he wasn't afraid. He looked at Riaz, who gave him a reassuring smile. Then he looked at his friends, all standing behind him, their faces filled with trust. No matter what came next, he knew he wasn't facing it alone. Office stepped closer to Issei, her eyes studying him intently. The title of Dragon God Emperor is not one that can be ignored. You will need guidance. If you are to wield this power, you must understand its full potential. Issei raised an eyebrow. And how do I do that? Office's gaze flicked to Great Red, who gave a knowing smirk. Oh, I think we can help with that. That night, after the summit had ended, Issei found himself on the balcony of the Grimmery mansion once again, staring out at the moonlit landscape. The meeting had been intense, but he felt more at peace than he had in days. The factions were still wary of him, but they hadn't turned against him. Not yet. Riaz joined him again, as she always did, her presence a constant source of comfort. How are you feeling? She asked softly, leaning against the railing beside him. Honestly, I'm not sure, Issei admitted. It's a lot to take in. I'm supposed to be this dragon god emperor now, but I don't even know what that means yet. Riaz smiled, her hand slipping into his. You don't have to figure it all out right away, Issei. We'll take it one step at a time. You've always fought for what you believe in, and that won't change. No matter how powerful you become, you're still you. Issei squeezed her hand, feeling a surge of gratitude. Thanks, Riaz. I don't know what I'd do without you. She leaned in, resting her head on his shoulder. You'll never have to find out. As they stood together under the stars, Issei felt a new sense of resolve. He didn't fully understand the power he now possessed, but he knew one thing. He would use it to protect those he loved. And if the world wanted him to be a dragon god emperor, he would face that challenge head-on. Because no matter how much things changed, Issei Haidu would never stop fighting for what mattered most. The day after the summit was eerily quiet. Issei, still reeling from the weight of his new title as the dragon god emperor, found himself pacing in his room. The grand gathering had revealed so much about his newfound power, but it had also left him with more questions than answers. What did it mean to be a god? And how would this change the delicate balance of the supernatural world? Issei couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to get more complicated. Issei, a familiar voice called from the door. It was Riaz, her expression soft yet concerned. Azazel just sent a message. He wants to meet with you privately. Issei blinked. Privately? What for? Riaz shrugged, though Issei could see the tension in her shoulders. He didn't say. But he did mention that it's important and urgent. Issei let out a long breath. All right. Let's see what this is about. In one of the Grimmery mansion's private study rooms, Azazel was already waiting when Issei arrived. The fallen angel leader stood by the window, gazing out at the horizon as if contemplating something serious. His usual laid-back demeanor was nowhere to be seen. Azazel, Issei greeted, stepping into the room. What's this all about? Azazel turned, his golden eyes narrowing slightly. Issei, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. There are factions within the supernatural world that are already plotting against you. Issei's heart skipped a beat. Plotting against me? Why? I haven't done anything. You're God now, Issei, Azazel said bluntly. And with that kind of power, you've automatically become a threat in the eyes of those who want to maintain the status quo. They fear that you'll upset the delicate balance between devils, angels, and fallen angels. But it's not just that. Azazel walked closer, his expression darkening. There are radical elements within the fallen angels who see you as an abomination. They view the dragon god emperor as a myth that should have stayed dead and buried. To them, you represent a force that shouldn't exist, a being capable of uniting or destroying the world. Issei clenched his fists. He had known that his new power would bring enemies, but he hadn't expected the threat to come so soon. Who's behind this? Issei asked, his voice low. Is it the fallen angels? Azazel shook his head. Not just them. There are rogue dragons and even certain devils who fear what you could become. Some of them believe that the only way to protect the world is to eliminate you before you can gain full control of your powers. A chill ran down Issei's spine. He had always faced enemies before, powerful foes that wanted to destroy him or his friends, but this was different. This wasn't about fighting for survival. This was about being hunted for what he was. Great, Issei muttered sarcastically, so now I've got an army of enemies coming after me because of a power I didn't even ask for. Azazel smirked slightly, though the amusement didn't reach his eyes. Welcome to godhood, Issei. Issei paced back and forth, his mind racing. What do I do, then? I'm not going to sit back and wait for them to make the first move. That's why I called you here, Azazel said, his voice growing serious again. We need to gather allies, people we can trust, who won't see you as a threat. If we don't, you'll be vulnerable, no matter how powerful you are. We can't afford to let them catch you off guard. Issei nodded, his determination growing. All right. Who can we count on? Azazel crossed his arms, thinking for a moment. Serziches and Michael will back you, of course. They've always respected you, and they know you're not the type to abuse power. The devils, at least the Grimory household and their allies, will be on your side. The angels will likely follow Michael's lead, and the fallen angels, well, I'll handle that part. But we need more than just the heads of the factions. Azazel's eyes gleamed. We need the dragons. Issei's eyes widened. The dragons. You mean Office and Great Red? Azazel nodded. Not just them. There are other dragon clans scattered across the world, beings of immense power who respect strength above all else. If you can prove yourself as the rightful dragon god emperor, you might be able to rally them to your cause. But it won't be easy. Issei frowned, rubbing the back of his neck. Prove myself. How am I supposed to do that? Azazel chuckled. That's the fun part. Dragons don't follow titles, Issei. They follow power. You're going to have to challenge the strongest dragons you can find and show them that you deserve to be their leader. Issei's heart pounded. He had faced dragons before, but this was on a whole different level. Challenging dragons across the world to prove his worth as the dragon god emperor. It sounded like a death wish. But at the same time, it made sense. If he was going to be the dragon god emperor, he couldn't just sit back and hope for things to work out. He had to earn it. I'll do it, Issei said, his voice firm. If that's what it takes to protect the people I care about, I'll face any dragon that comes my way. Azazel grinned, his usual mischievous spark returning to his eyes. That's the spirit. I knew I could count on you. Later that evening, Issei sat in his room, deep in thought. The day's revelations weighed heavily on his mind. He had enemies, powerful ones who wanted him dead. But he also had allies, people who believed in him, people he trusted. And now, he had a new goal. To prove himself as the true dragon god emperor. As he sat there, the door creaked open, and Rhea stepped inside. Her face was calm, but Issei could see the worry in her eyes. Issei, she said softly, sitting beside him on the bed. Azazel told me what's going on. About the threats and the dragons. Issei sighed. Yeah. It's a lot, isn't it? I didn't think becoming the dragon god emperor would mean having to fight half the world. Rhea leaned against him, her warmth comforting in the quiet room. You've always fought for what's right, Issei. That won't change, no matter what. And you won't be doing it alone. Issei smiled faintly, his heart swelling with gratitude. I know. But still I have to face these dragons. I have to prove myself. Rhea looked up at him, her eyes filled with love and resolve. Then you will. You've already proven yourself to me and everyone else. The dragons will see it too. You're stronger than you realize, Issei. And no matter what happens, we'll face it together. Issei wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. The warmth of her body and the certainty in her voice eased the tension in his chest. She believed in him. They all did. And that gave him the strength to keep going. I love you, Rhea, Issei whispered, his voice filled with emotion. She smiled softly, resting her head on his chest. I love you too, Issei. As they sat together, wrapped in each other's warmth, Issei felt a surge of determination. He didn't know what the future held, whether it was battles with dragons or dealing with enemies who wanted him dead, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't alone in this fight. And as long as he had Rhea and his friends by his side, he would face whatever came next with the strength of a dragon god emperor. The sky above the valley was filled with the sound of beating wings as dragons from all corners of the world descended upon the gathering. Massive ancient beasts, each exuding an aura of immense power, arrived one by one, landing in a circle around the clearing. Their eyes gleamed with curiosity, skepticism, and a trace of fear. Issei stood at the center of the clearing, dwarfed by their immense forms, yet he remained resolute. He had known this moment was coming. The Council of Dragons, a meeting of the most powerful dragon clans in existence. This was where he would prove himself worthy of the title Dragon God Emperor. It wasn't just about showing his strength, but earning the respect and loyalty of dragons who had lived for millennia, bound only by their own codes of power and pride. To his left, Rhea stood alongside him, her presence a constant source of support. Akeno, Asia, Zenobia, and the others from his peerage watched from the edge of the clearing, their expressions a mix of concern and faith. They knew the gravity of the situation, and none of them would have let Issei come here alone. But in the end, this was his challenge. Hovering above them, the massive form of Great Red, the Apocalypse Dragon, lounged in the sky, his eyes glinting with amusement. Nearby, Office, the Ouroboros dragon, stood silently, her gaze unreadable. The dragons watched as the last of their kin landed, the ground shaking under the weight of the massive creatures. The leader of the dragon clans, a colossal silver-scaled dragon named Tiffin, stepped forward. His eyes blazed with authority as he towered over Issei, his voice rumbling like thunder. "Issei Haidu," Tiffin began, his gaze sweeping over the clearing. "You stand here as one who claims the title of Dragon God Emperor. But titles alone mean nothing to us. Dragons bow only to power and to those who prove themselves worthy. Why should we, the ancient and mighty dragons, acknowledge you as our ruler?" Issei took a deep breath, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it, the moment he had been preparing for. He stepped forward, his eyes locking onto Tiffin's. He knew he couldn't afford to show any weakness here. These dragons respected strength, and anything less would be seen as a failure. "I didn't ask for this power," Issei said, his voice steady but filled with determination. "I never sought to become the Dragon God Emperor. But the power chose me. And I'm not here to rule over you or force you to bow. I'm here because I want to protect the people I care about. If proving myself to you is what it takes, then I'll do it. Not for power, but for those who need me." There was a moment of silence as the dragons considered his words. Tiffin's massive head tilted slightly, his eyes narrowing. "And how do you plan to prove yourself, boy?" Tiffin growled. "You stand here, surrounded by beings who have lived for eons. Do you think mere words will convince us?" Issei took another step forward, his eyes flashing with determination. "I'll prove myself through combat. If strength is what you respect, then I'll show you mine. But know this, I don't fight for dominance. I fight for my friends, for my loved ones, and for the people I care about. That's where my strength comes from." Tiffin let out a low rumble, clearly intrigued. "Very well, Issei Haidu. You wish to challenge your strength, to prove yourself as the Dragon God Emperor. Then let us see if you truly have what it takes." At Tiffin's signal, a massive dragon with black scales stepped forward, its golden eyes gleaming with hunger for battle. This dragon was huge, even by dragon standards, and its sheer size made it clear that it was a warrior among its kind. Issei tensed, feeling the weight of the challenge ahead. This was no ordinary battle. The dragons were testing him, not just in strength but in his resolve. He could feel Ddraig stirring within him, the Red Dragon Emperor's voice echoing in his mind. "Partner," Ddraig said, his tone both serious and proud. "This is your moment. Show them the strength of the Dragon God Emperor." Issei nodded, his heart steady now. He activated his boosted gear, the familiar red gauntlet forming on his arm, pulsing with power. But this time, the aura around it wasn't just red, it was laced with golden energy, the power of the Dragon God Emperor coursing through him. The black-scaled dragon let out a roar and lunged at Issei, its claws tearing through the air with deadly speed. Issei leaped into the sky, his wings forming behind him as he soared above the battlefield. The golden aura around him flared, and with a swift motion, he unleashed a blast of energy toward the oncoming dragon. The dragon dodged with surprising agility for its size, its claws grazing Issei's armor as they clashed mid-air. The force of the impact sent shockwaves through the valley, but Issei didn't falter. He could feel the power of the Dragon God Emperor surging through him, pushing him beyond his limits. With a roar of his own, Issei summoned the power of Ddraig and the Dragon God Emperor, combining the two forces into one. His fists glowed with golden energy as he struck the black dragon head-on, the impact sending the massive beast crashing into the ground. The dragons watching from the sidelines murmured in approval, their eyes gleaming with newfound respect. But the black dragon wasn't finished yet. It rose from the crater it had formed, snarling with rage. Issei's heart pounded, but he remained calm. He knew that brute force alone wouldn't win this fight. He had to outsmart his opponent, to show not just strength, but the wisdom of a ruler. As the black dragon lunged at him again, Issei dodged to the side, using his agility to his advantage. He summoned his golden aura, channeling it into a concentrated blast. With a swift motion, he unleashed the Dragon God Emperor's power, striking the black dragon with a force so immense that it shattered the air around them. The black dragon let out a final roar before collapsing to the ground, defeated. Issei hovered above, breathing heavily but victorious. He had done it. He had proven his strength, not just through raw power, but through strategy and determination. As the black-scaled dragon lay defeated, Tiffin stepped forward once again, his massive form looming over Issei. The silver-scaled dragon's eyes gleamed with approval as he gazed down at the young dragon god emperor. "You have proven yourself, Issei Haidu," Tiffin rumbled, his voice filled with respect. "You possess not only the strength of a dragon, but the heart of a true leader. The Council of Dragons recognizes you as the dragon god emperor." Issei's heart swelled with relief and pride, but he kept his composure. This was just the beginning. The dragons had acknowledged him, but he knew that his journey was far from over. Tiffin continued, his voice echoing across the valley. "From this day forward, the dragons will stand with you, Issei Haidu. You have earned our respect and our loyalty." The dragons surrounding them let out roars of approval, their voices shaking the earth beneath them. Issei looked around, feeling the weight of their acknowledgement. He had proven himself worthy of the title Dragon God Emperor, but more importantly, he had earned the respect of beings who valued strength above all else. As the dragons roared, Riaz approached Issei, her eyes filled with pride. "You did it, Issei," she whispered, her hand reaching for his. Issei smiled, taking her hand in his. "I couldn't have done it without all of you. This is just the beginning." Riaz leaned closer, her lips brushing his ear as she whispered, "You're not just our dragon god emperor, Issei. You're the one who will change everything." And with that, Issei felt a surge of confidence. He had faced the Council of Dragons, earned their respect, and now had allies in his quest to protect the ones he loved. But deep down, he knew that this victory would bring new challenges. Enemies still lurked in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. But for now, he was ready. He wasn't just the Red Dragon Emperor anymore. He was the Dragon God Emperor. The days following the Council of Dragons felt like a rare moment of calm for Issei and his friends. The dragons had pledged their loyalty to him as the Dragon God Emperor, and for the first time in what felt like ages, Issei believed that he was on the right path. He had earned the respect of one of the most powerful factions in the supernatural world, and with their backing, he was better prepared to face the challenges ahead. But calm was often a fragile thing. Issei and his peerage were back in the Gremory mansion, the sun setting over the horizon as the group gathered for a casual evening. Riaz sat next to Issei, laughing at something Akeno had said, while Kaneko and Zenobia sparred in the garden. Asia was busy preparing tea, her usual gentle smile on her face. For a moment, everything felt normal. Then a messenger arrived, a devil from the Bale family, stepping into the room with an urgent expression. His presence alone was enough to bring the conversation to an abrupt halt. The tension in the air was immediate. "Issei Haidu," the messenger said, bowing respectfully. "There has been a disturbance in the underworld. Lord Serziches requests your presence immediately." Issei frowned, standing up from his seat. "A disturbance? What kind of disturbance?" The messenger hesitated for a moment, then spoke quietly. "It appears that a faction of the devils has broken away. They're calling themselves the True Devil Alliance, and their leader is someone close to you." Issei's heart skipped a beat. "Someone close to me?" Riaz, who had been listening intently, stood beside him, her expression filled with concern. "Who is it?" she asked, her voice tight with worry. The messenger looked directly at Issei. "Kuroka, the former Nekashu, and a member of your peerage." The room fell silent. Kuroka, Kaneko's older sister, had been part of their extended group for some time, though she was never officially under Issei's command. But her betrayal struck hard, especially since she had earned Issei's trust after proving herself in several battles. The idea that she had broken away to join a rogue faction was unthinkable. Kaneko, who had been sparring in the garden, had overheard the conversation and rushed into the room, her face pale. "Kuroka betrayed us." Issei's fists clenched at his sides. He could hardly believe it himself. Kuroka had always been unpredictable, but he never thought she would go this far. There had to be more to the story, something driving her decision. "I'm going to the underworld," Issei said, his voice hardening. "I need to find out what's going on." Riaz grabbed his arm, her expression pleading. "Issei, you can't rush into this. If Kuroka really has joined a faction that opposes us, this could be a trap. We need to think this through." Issei knew she was right, but the thought of someone he considered a friend turning against them burned in his chest. "I need answers, Riaz. If Kuroka is behind this, I have to know why." Riaz nodded, though her eyes were filled with worry. "Then we go together. We'll face this as a team, like always." Issei's heart warmed at her words. No matter what, Riaz and the others would always stand by his side. Arriving in the underworld felt different this time. There was a tension in the air, a feeling that something wasn't quite right. The once vibrant cities and open landscapes seemed darker, and whispers of unrest echoed in every corner. The True Devil Alliance had been gaining power quickly, and its radical ideas of a return to the old ways where only pure-blooded devils ruled supreme were spreading like wildfire. Issei, Riaz, and the rest of the group were escorted to a private chamber where Surziches, Azazel, and Michael awaited them. The leaders of the devils, fallen angels, and angels had gathered to discuss this new threat, and the atmosphere in the room was heavy with concern. Issei, Surziches began, his voice calm but serious. We have reason to believe that Kuroka is one of the leaders of this true devil alliance. We've confirmed sightings of her at several of their gatherings. They see you in your rise to power as the Dragon God Emperor as a threat to the old order. They want to return to a time when the devils ruled without interference from other factions. Issei's eyes darkened. But why would Kuroka join them? She's never cared about that kind of politics before. She's always been a free spirit. Azazel, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, spoke up. It's possible that Kuroka is being manipulated. Or, she could have her own reasons, perhaps something personal that we don't know about. But whatever her motivation, she's dangerous now. The True Devil Alliance has been gathering strength for months, and with her power, they're even more of a threat. Haneko, who had been silent until now, stepped forward, her fists clenched. I want to talk to her, she said quietly. Kuroka is my sister. If there's any chance that I can reach her, I have to try. Issei looked at Kaneko, his heart heavy with understanding. He knew how much her relationship with her sister meant to her. But this was more than just a family matter now, it was a potential war. I understand, Kaneko, Issei said gently. We'll find her, and we'll try to talk to her. But if she's really committed to this, we need to be ready for anything. Kaneko nodded, though her eyes were filled with pain. Later that night, as the group prepared to leave for the location where Kuroka had last been seen, Issei stood on the balcony of the mansion, staring out at the moonlit landscape. Riaz joined him, her presence as calming as ever. Are you ready for this? She asked softly, slipping her hand into his. Issei sighed, his mind racing. I don't know. I just don't understand why Kuroka would do this. She's always been unpredictable, but this feels wrong. Riaz leaned her head on his shoulder. We don't know what's really going on in her mind. But we'll face it together, Issei. No matter what happens, we'll figure it out. Issei squeezed her hand, grateful for her unwavering support. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that this betrayal was just the beginning. The True Devil Alliance wasn't just a group of radicals, they were organized, and they had a plan. As they prepared to leave for the confrontation, Issei couldn't help but wonder if Kuroka was truly behind this. Or was there someone else pulling the strings? Someone even more dangerous. The battlefield where they finally found Kuroka was a desolate wasteland on the outskirts of the underworld, where the sky was always dark and the ground was cracked and scorched. Kuroka stood in the center, her usual playful expression replaced with something colder, more dangerous. Her black tail swished behind her, and her golden eyes gleamed as she watched them approach. Kuroka, Issei called out, stepping forward with Kaneko by his side. What are you doing? Why are you with them? Kuroka smirked, though there was a flicker of something deeper in her eyes. Issei, Kaneko, you wouldn't understand. This world needs to change. The old ways are the true ways, and the devils should never have let themselves be tainted by alliances with angels and fallen angels. Kaneko's voice trembled as she spoke. Kuroka, this isn't you. You never cared about politics before. What happened to you? Kuroka's expression softened for just a moment as she looked at her sister. I'm doing this for our kind, Shirin. The devils have become weak. And Issei's power is a threat to everything. He's not just a devil anymore. He's something else, something that shouldn't exist. Issei felt a pang of betrayal, but he remained calm. Kuroka, I never wanted this power. But I'm not going to let anyone use it to hurt the people I care about. Kuroka's eyes darkened, her playful smirk returning. Then prove it, Issei. Show me the power of the Dragon God Emperor. And with that, the battle began. The air crackled with energy as Kuroka's challenge hung in the space between them. Issei stood tense, his eyes locked on hers, but his heart was heavy. This wasn't the kind of fight he wanted, not against someone he had once trusted, someone who had become like family. But now, she stood aligned with the True Devil Alliance, a radical faction that viewed him and his power as a threat to the balance of the supernatural world. Issei's voice broke through his thoughts as she stepped up beside him, her crimson hair flowing in the soft breeze. We can still stop this without violence. But Kuroka's sharp, mocking laugh cut through the air. Violence is inevitable, Riaz. The old ways must return. Devils must reclaim their rightful place as rulers of all. And your Dragon God Emperor, she spat, the title with venom, stands in the way of that. Issei's fists clenched, but he remained steady. He could feel Ddraig stirring within him, his deep ancient voice calm but alert. She's testing you, partner. But something feels off about this. There's more at play here than just a political divide. Issei nodded subtly. He could sense it too, a dark presence lurking beneath the surface, something more dangerous than Kuroka or the True Devil Alliance alone. He couldn't afford to hold back, but he also couldn't afford to fall into whatever trap had been set. I won't fight you, Kuroka, Issei said, his voice steady and resolute. Not unless I have no other choice. Kuroka's golden eyes narrowed and her smirk faltered for just a moment. You'll regret that decision, Issei. In an instant, she vanished, moving faster than most could track, her claws aiming straight for his heart. But Issei was ready. He sidestepped the attack, his wings flaring as he took to the air, avoiding her strikes with fluid motion. He could feel her immense power, but something was different. There was an edge to it, like it was amplified by something darker, more sinister. Haneko, watching from the sidelines, clenched her fists. She wanted to run to her sister, to demand answers, but she held back, knowing that this battle had to happen. There was no going back now. Issei soared higher, keeping his distance as Kuroka pursued him relentlessly. Her speed and power had grown significantly since their last encounter, and it was clear that she had been preparing for this. But Issei had something she didn't. He wasn't just the Red Dragon Emperor anymore. He was the Dragon God Emperor. With a burst of golden energy, Issei unleashed a shockwave that sent Kuroka tumbling backward. She landed gracefully, her feet skidding across the cracked ground, but her eyes blazed with fury. You think that's enough? She growled, her aura flaring with dark energy. I'm stronger than you remember, Issei. And I won't stop until the old ways are restored. Issei hovered above her, his golden aura swirling around him like a storm. You're not thinking clearly, Kuroka. This isn't about the old ways or power struggles. Someone is using you, manipulating you. Kuroka's eyes flickered with something doubt, maybe. But it vanished as quickly as it had appeared. You're wrong. Before Issei could respond, the ground beneath them shook violently and the sky above darkened. A low, ominous rumble filled the air and the temperature dropped, sending chills down Issei's spine. Out of the shadows, a figure emerged, a towering, menacing presence wrapped in dark robes that seemed to absorb the light around it. Its face was obscured, but the aura it emitted was unmistakable. It was ancient, powerful, and filled with malice. Issei Haidu, Dragon God Emperor, the figure's voice was low and resonant, filled with a strange mixture of disdain and amusement. So, you've finally begun to realize the extent of your power. But you're still naive, clinging to the notion that strength alone will save you. Issei's eyes narrowed. Who are you? The figure chuckled, the sound echoing through the valley. I am Tenebris, a forgotten remnant of the old world. Long before your kind meddled with the affairs of gods and dragons, I ruled in the shadows, sowing chaos and despair. But now, thanks to your rise, I have returned. And with the true Devil Alliance as my pawns, I will reclaim what is rightfully mine. Issei's heart raced. This was it, the dark force he had sensed. Tenebris wasn't just some powerful being, he was something much worse, something ancient and sinister. And worse, Kuroka had fallen under his influence. Kuroka, Issei called out, his voice laced with desperation. You're being manipulated. This isn't about the old ways or devils reclaiming their power. It's about Tenebris using you to fuel his own agenda. For the first time, Kuroka hesitated. Her eyes flicked to the dark figure standing behind her, and for a brief moment, uncertainty crossed her face. But Tenebris's presence loomed over her like a shadow, and whatever doubt she had was quickly swallowed by his influence. Enough, Tenebris hissed. This is not a decision anymore. With a flick of his hand, a wave of dark energy shot toward Issei, faster and more deadly than anything he had ever seen. Issei barely had time to react, raising his hand to block the attack. The force of it sent him flying backward, slamming into the ground with enough force to crack the earth beneath him. Issei! Rhea screamed, rushing toward him. But Issei pushed himself up, his body glowing with golden light as he activated the full power of the Dragon God Emperor. He couldn't afford to hold back anymore, not against Tenebris. You think you can manipulate people to do your bidding? Issei growled, his aura flaring even brighter. I won't let you hurt them. Tenebris laughed, his voice dripping with condescension. You are but a child playing with the power of gods. Do you truly believe you can stand against me? Issei's eyes blazed with determination. I don't care how strong you are. I'll fight to protect the people I care about, even if it means facing you alone. But he wasn't alone. Riaz, Akeno, Kaneko, Zenobia, and the rest of his friends stood beside him, their faces filled with determination. They were ready to fight with him, no matter what came next. You're not alone, Issei, Riaz said firmly, her hand gripping his tightly. We're with you. Always. Issei's heart swelled with pride and love. He wasn't just fighting for his friends, he was fighting with them. With a roar, Issei unleashed a massive wave of golden energy, his Dragon God Emperor powers pushing beyond anything he had ever felt before. The golden light shot toward Tenebris, colliding with the dark aura that surrounded him. The two forces clashed, sending shockwaves through the air as the ground beneath them shook violently. For a moment, it seemed like the two forces were evenly matched, but slowly, Issei's golden energy began to push back the darkness. Tenebris let out a furious roar, but Issei didn't stop. He poured everything he had into the attack, determined to protect his friends and stop this ancient evil once and for all. With one final push, Issei's golden energy overwhelmed Tenebrous' darkness, and the ancient being let out a scream of rage and agony as he was consumed by the light. The battlefield went silent as the dark figure of Tenebrous vanished, leaving nothing but the faint echoes of his defeat in the air. Hiroka stood frozen, her eyes wide with shock and disbelief. The dark influence that had controlled her seemed to lift, and she fell to her knees, her body trembling. "Hiroka," Kaneko whispered, rushing to her sister's side. "Are you okay?" Hiroka looked up at her younger sister, tears brimming in her golden eyes. "Shirin, I'm sorry. I didn't realize." Issei approached cautiously, his heart heavy with both relief and sadness. "Hiroka, it's not too late. You don't have to follow this path anymore." Hiroka looked at him, her expression filled with guilt and regret. "I was a fool. I let myself be blinded by promises of power. But you saved me." Issei smiled softly, offering his hand to her. "We saved each other." As Hiroka took his hand, a sense of peace settled over the battlefield. The immediate threat had been vanquished, but Issei knew this wasn't the end. There were still enemies lurking in the shadows, still battles to be fought. But for now, they had won a victory, one that would give them the strength to face whatever came next. And with his friends by his side, Issei Haidu, the Dragon God Emperor, was ready for whatever the future held. The victory against Tenebrous had been a hard-fought battle, but it felt hollow in the aftermath. While Issei and his friends had succeeded in driving back the ancient threat, the looming sense of unease hadn't disappeared. The true Devil Alliance was still out there, and their motives had yet to fully reveal themselves. Hiroka's betrayal and redemption had left Issei questioning how deep this conspiracy ran, and how many more of their allies might be influenced by hidden forces. As days passed, rumors began to spread throughout the underworld and beyond. Whispers of unrest filled the air, and many believed that the rise of the Dragon God Emperor had thrown the delicate balance between the factions into disarray. Some praised Issei for his strength and vision, while others saw his ascension as a destabilizing force. It didn't take long before tensions between devils, angels, fallen angels, and even rogue dragons reached a boiling point. Issei stood on the balcony of the Grimoire mansion, staring out at the distant horizon. The world felt heavier now, as if the very fabric of their reality was straining under the weight of new and old powers clashing. He could feel the ripples of unrest in the air, the growing pressure of the conflict brewing in the shadows. "You're thinking too much," Ria said softly from behind him, her presence grounding him as always. Issei turned to face her, offering a small smile, though the worry still lingered in his eyes. "I can't help it, Rias. Things are getting worse. We've stopped Tenebrous, but the true Devil Alliance is still out there, and they're more dangerous than ever." Rias moved closer, resting her hand gently on his arm. "We'll deal with them, just like we always do. We've faced impossible odds before, Issei. This is no different." Issei appreciated her confidence, but deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that this time, the stakes were higher than ever. "I just feel like there's something we're not seeing yet. Tenebrous was only part of the picture. There's something bigger going on." Before Rias could respond, Akeno appeared at the door, her expression serious. "Issei, Rias Surziches has called for a meeting. The leaders of all the factions will be gathering in the underworld tomorrow to discuss the rising tensions." Issei frowned. "A summit?" Akeno nodded. "Yes. The factions are growing restless, and Surziches wants to prevent a full-scale war. He believes that if we can get everyone to the table, we might be able to avoid a conflict. But there's talk that the true Devil Alliance is planning something during the summit." Rias narrowed her eyes. "They wouldn't dare attack during such a high-profile event. It would be suicide." Akeno crossed her arms, her usual calm demeanor clouded with concern. "They're growing desperate, Rias. If they see an opportunity to strike at Issei and destabilize the balance further, they might be willing to take that risk." Issei let out a heavy sigh. "Looks like we don't have much of a choice. We have to go to the summit, but we'll need to be ready for anything." The next day, the grand hall where the summit was held was an imposing structure deep within the underworld. Massive pillars lined the walls, and the ceiling was adorned with intricate carvings of devils, angels, and dragons, reminders of the delicate balance that had existed for centuries between the factions. Issei, Rias, Akeno, and the rest of their peerage entered the hall together, their eyes scanning the room. The atmosphere was tense. Seated at the long table were the leaders of the supernatural world. Surziches Lucifer, the Devil King, sat at the head, his expression serious but calm. Michael, the leader of the angels, stood beside him, his golden wings folded behind him. Azazel, the leader of the fallen angels, leaned casually against the wall, though his sharp eyes missed nothing. But what stood out most were the empty seats that belonged to leaders who had refused to attend, no doubt aligning themselves with the true Devil Alliance, or simply choosing to stay out of what they believed would be a losing battle. Issei, Surziches greeted him with a nod. "Thank you for coming. This summit is critical. The tensions between the factions are at an all-time high. If we don't reach an agreement here, I fear war may be inevitable. Issei took his place at the table, feeling the weight of everyone's gaze upon him. As the Dragon God Emperor, his presence alone was enough to stir both hope and fear among those gathered. He knew that many of the leaders viewed him as an unknown factor, a being with godlike power, who could either unite or destroy the supernatural world. "We need to find a way to calm the factions," Michael said, his voice as serene as ever. "There are many who see the rise of the Dragon God Emperor as a threat. They fear that his power will disrupt the balance we've worked so hard to maintain." Azazel chuckled, though it was devoid of humor. "The balance was always fragile, Michael. Issei's power isn't the issue here. The True Devil Alliance has been waiting for an excuse to act, and Issei just gave them the perfect one. But if they're planning something at the summit, it's going to be more than just posturing." As the discussion continued, Issei could feel the tension in the room growing. Every word was laced with the unspoken fear that this summit would be their last chance to prevent chaos from engulfing the entire supernatural world. Suddenly, the doors to the hall burst open, and a figure stormed in, one of Surzich's most trusted advisors, his face pale and his eyes wide with fear. "My lord." The advisor cried out, his voice trembling. "There's been an attack. Several key outposts in the underworld have been destroyed. The True Devil Alliance has made their move. They're coming here." Gasps filled the room as the leaders stood in shock. Surzich's expression darkened, and Michael's wings unfurled in alarm. "They've planned this all along," Surzich's muttered under his breath. "A diversion to lure us here while they struck our defenses." Issei's heart pounded in his chest as he stood, his wings flaring. "They're not here for the summit. They're here for me." Azazel nodded grimly. "Of course. They know that if they can take you down, it will send the entire supernatural world into chaos. Without the Dragon God Emperor, the factions will turn on each other." Surzich's eyes met Issei's, a rare flicker of uncertainty crossing the Devil King's usually composed expression. "Issei, we have to prepare for an attack. The True Devil Alliance will stop at nothing to take you out." Issei's mind raced as he thought of all the possibilities. The True Devil Alliance had been waiting for this moment, building their forces and planning their moves. Now, with the leaders of the factions gathered in one place, they had a perfect opportunity to strike. But Issei wasn't going to let that happen. "I won't let them win," Issei said, his voice firm as he stepped forward. "They think they can use my power to tear the world apart, but I'm not going to let that happen. We'll face them together, just like we always have." Riaz stepped beside him, her determination mirroring his. "We're with you, Issei. Whatever happens, we'll stand by your side." The other members of Issei's peerage gathered around him, their faces filled with resolve. They had faced countless enemies before, and they would face this one together. But as the ground began to shake and the sound of battle echoed from outside the grand hall, Issei knew that this was different. This wasn't just a fight for survival, this was a battle for the future of the entire supernatural world. A storm had gathered, and now, it was time to face it head-on. The ground trembled beneath their feet as the sounds of battle echoed through the grand hall. Issei's heart pounded, adrenaline surging through his veins. The True Devil Alliance had launched their attack, and the storm was upon them. The summit, meant to bring peace, had instead become the battlefield where the fate of the supernatural world would be decided. "Everyone, get ready," Issei commanded, his voice steady despite the chaos. Riaz, Akeno, Kaneko, and the rest of his peerage moved into position, their faces filled with determination. They had faced countless enemies before, but this time, the stakes were higher than ever. From outside the hall, the sounds of clashing swords, magic, and the roars of dragons filled the air. The True Devil Alliance had unleashed their full force, and Issei knew they wouldn't stop until they had him. "We need to protect the leaders," Surzich's said, stepping up beside Issei. His crimson eyes gleamed with determination, but there was an edge of concern. If the Alliance takes them out, it could throw the entire world into chaos. Issei nodded. "I'll hold them off. You and the others secure the hall. This is bigger than just me. We can't let them tear the factions apart." Surzich's placed a hand on Issei's shoulder. "Be careful, Issei. You may be the Dragon God Emperor, but they'll stop at nothing to destroy you." "I know," Issei replied, his voice low but filled with resolve. "But I'm not alone." Riaz gave him a confident smile, standing by his side. "We'll stand together. No matter what happens." With that, Issei turned toward the entrance, where the doors had been blown open by the force of the attack. The sky outside was dark, swirling with ominous clouds as powerful magic and energy collided. Issei could feel the presence of the True Devil Alliance's leaders approaching, dangerous beings, some of whom had once been allies. As Issei and his peerage stepped outside the hall, they were met with a battlefield that stretched across the underworld. Devils, angels, fallen angels, and dragons clashed in a chaotic war, the ground scorched by magic, and the air filled with the sound of wings and battle cries. In the distance, Issei saw the leaders of the True Devil Alliance, their dark auras radiating power as they marched forward, their sights set on him. Leading them was a figure Issei recognized instantly: Cao Cao, the former leader of the hero faction, now aligned with the True Devil Alliance. His spear, the True Longinus, gleamed ominously in the darkness. "So, the Dragon God Emperor finally shows himself," Cao Cao sneered, his voice dripping with arrogance. "I've been waiting for this moment, Issei Haidu. You've become a symbol of everything we despise: power unchecked, a world out of balance. Today, we end that." Issei's eyes narrowed. "You're making a mistake, Cao Cao. This isn't about balance. It's about control. You're just using the chaos to push your own agenda." Cao Cao laughed, twirling his spear in his hand. "Call it what you like. But when I defeat you, I'll show the world that even a god can fall." With a roar, Cao Cao charged at Issei, his spear glowing with holy light. Issei barely had time to react, summoning his boosted gear and blocking the attack just in time. The force of the blow sent shockwaves through the air, but Issei held his ground. "You're going to have to do better than that," Issei growled, pushing back against the spear. His golden aura flared as the power of the Dragon God Emperor surged through him, and with a burst of energy, he sent Cao Cao flying backward. But before Issei could press the attack, he sensed another presence approaching. From the sky, a massive dragon descended, one of the rogue dragons that had joined the True Devil Alliance. Its dark scales gleamed in the moonlight, and its eyes burned with hatred as it let out a deafening roar. Issei took to the air, his wings flaring as he met the dragon head-on. The two clashed in mid-air, the dragon's massive claws swiping at Issei, while he dodged and countered with blasts of golden energy. The dragon's strength was immense, but Issei wasn't holding back. With a powerful punch, he sent the dragon crashing into the ground below, leaving a crater in its wake. Meanwhile, Riaz and the others were locked in combat with the rest of the True Devil Alliance. Akeno unleashed devastating lightning attacks, while Kaneko, Zenobia and Gasper fought fiercely, holding their own against the Alliance's soldiers. But the enemy was relentless, and for every soldier they defeated, more seemed to take their place. Issei landed back on the battlefield, breathing heavily as he prepared for the next attack. Cao Cao stood up from the rubble, a wicked smile on his face, despite the blood dripping from his lip. "You've gotten stronger, Issei," Cao Cao said, wiping the blood away. "But it won't be enough." Before Issei could respond, the ground shook violently, and a dark portal opened in the sky above them. From the portal, a figure emerged, a being of immense power, shrouded in darkness. Issei's heart skipped a beat as he recognized the presence. It was Erebus, the primordial god of darkness, an ancient being who had sided with the True Devil Alliance to sow chaos and bring about the destruction of the factions. His aura was suffocating, like the void itself had descended upon the battlefield. "Issei Haidu," Erebus's voice echoed across the battlefield, deep and chilling. "You think you can stand against me? You, who have barely begun to understand the power you wield." Issei gritted his teeth, feeling the weight of Erebus's power pressing down on him. "I don't care who you are. I'm not going to let you destroy everything we've worked for." Erebus laughed, a low, rumbling sound that made the air vibrate. "You are but a child in the face of true darkness." With a wave of his hand, Erebus unleashed a torrent of dark energy, powerful enough to tear through the fabric of reality itself. Issei raised his hand, summoning his golden aura to protect himself, but the force of the attack was overwhelming. He could feel his defenses cracking under the weight of the darkness, and for a moment, fear gripped his heart. But then, in the midst of the chaos, Ria's voice called out to him. "Issei. We're with you." Her words cut through the darkness, and Issei felt a surge of strength. He wasn't fighting alone. He never was. His friends, his loved ones, they were all here, fighting by his side. With renewed determination, Issei pushed back against Erebus's attack, his golden aura flaring brighter than ever before. The power of the Dragon God Emperor coursed through him, and for the first time, he truly understood what it meant to wield such power. It wasn't just about strength. It was about protecting the people he loved, about standing for something greater than himself. Dragon God Emperor's fury. Issei roared, channeling all of his power into a single devastating attack. The golden light shot toward Erebus, clashing with the darkness in a blinding explosion of energy. The battlefield shook as the two forces collided, but slowly, Issei's power began to overpower the darkness. Erebus let out a furious scream as the golden energy consumed him, shattering his form and sending shockwaves through the battlefield. When the dust finally settled, Erebus was gone, his dark presence erased from existence. The battlefield was silent, the True Devil Alliance retreating in the face of their defeat. Issei hovered in the air, breathing heavily as the golden light around him faded. He had done it. They had done it. But as he landed back on the ground, surrounded by his friends, he knew this wasn't the end. The factions were still divided, and the True Devil Alliance might rise again. But for now, they had won a victory, and Issei had proven himself as the Dragon God Emperor. Riaz approached him, her eyes filled with pride and love. "You did it, Issei. Issei smiled, pulling her into his arms. We did it. As the sun began to rise over the battlefield, casting its light over the ruined landscape, Issei looked out at the horizon. The battle was over, but the war for peace was just beginning. The aftermath of the battle hung over the underworld like a lingering storm. The leaders of the supernatural world had been saved, Erebus was defeated, and the True Devil Alliance had been driven back. Yet, despite the victory, the air felt heavy with uncertainty. The lines between the factions were still blurred, and the question of how to prevent future conflicts loomed large. Issei stood in the grand hall where the summit had taken place, staring at the empty seats around the long table. The echoes of battle still haunted him, but what weighed on him more was the responsibility that came with his newfound power. Being the Dragon God Emperor wasn't just about fighting powerful enemies. It was about leadership, unity, and preventing the chaos that Erebus had tried to unleash. Rias, Akeno, Kaneko, and the rest of his peerage stood around him, their faces tired but filled with quiet determination. They had all fought valiantly, but Issei knew that their battle wasn't just physical. There was a deeper conflict at play, one that involved the very future of the supernatural world. It's over, but it doesn't feel like a real victory, does it? Issei asked quietly, his voice carrying the weight of the recent events. Rias, standing beside him, nodded slowly. We stopped Erebus, and the True Devil Alliance has retreated for now. But the world isn't the same. The factions are divided, and there's fear of what you've become, Issei. Issei sighed, running a hand through his hair. I never wanted this power. I never wanted to be someone everyone feared. But now everything feels different. They don't just see me as Issei anymore. They see the Dragon God Emperor, and that's making things worse. Akeno stepped forward, her usual teasing smile replaced with a serious expression. There are many who still believe in you, Issei. Surziches, Michael, and Azazel, they all see you as an ally, not a threat. But there are others who are afraid. The True Devil Alliance was just the beginning. We need to show them that you're not a tyrant, that your power is meant to protect, not dominate. Issei looked out over the hall, his heart heavy. He had always fought to protect those he cared about, but now, his power had placed him in a position where others saw him as a destabilizing force. He couldn't blame them. The world had changed so much, and the balance between the factions had been delicate even before he had ascended to godhood. I can't let this power control me, Issei said finally, his voice firm. I have to show them that I'm still me. But how do I do that when they're also afraid of what I might become? Kaneko, who had been standing quietly, spoke up, her voice soft but full of conviction. You're not alone, Issei. You've always fought for what's right, and you've always put others before yourself. People will see that. We'll help them see it. Issei smiled at Kaneko's words, feeling a bit of the weight lift from his shoulders. His friends, his family, they had always believed in him, and that gave him the strength to keep going. Before they could continue the conversation, the doors to the hall opened and Surziches entered, his face solemn but composed. He walked up to Issei, placing a hand on his shoulder. Issei, the council wants to speak with you, Surziches said. The leaders of the factions have agreed to meet privately. They need to hear from you directly about what comes next. Issei nodded, feeling a knot of tension in his chest. I'll do whatever it takes to keep the peace. The private council meeting was held in a smaller chamber within the same grand structure. The leaders of the factions were seated around a circular table, Surziches representing the devils, Michael representing the angels, and Azazel for the fallen angels. A few other key figures were present, but the mood in the room was tense. Issei could feel the weight of their expectations as he entered the chamber, Rias and Akeno by his side. Issei, Michael greeted him, his voice calm but serious. You've proven your strength and your loyalty in battle. But now we must address the reality of what you've become. The supernatural world is changing, and many are uncertain of what your rise as the Dragon God Emperor means for the balance of power. Azazel leaned forward, his sharp eyes studying Issei intently. People are afraid, Issei. They fear that the power you wield could upset everything. It's not just about you defeating enemies like Erebus, it's about what happens next. How do you plan to use this power? Issei took a deep breath, meeting the gazes of the leaders around him. I never wanted this power to dominate or rule over anyone. I've always fought to protect the people I care about. I want to use this power to maintain peace between the factions, not to tear them apart. Surziches nodded, his expression thoughtful. And how do you propose to do that? There are many who see your strength as a challenge to the existing order. Some believe that, as a god, you should take control and lead. Others believe your power should be limited. Issei frowned. I don't want to rule. I've never wanted that. I believe the factions should continue to govern themselves. I don't want to interfere with that. But I'll use my power to protect the peace and prevent conflicts like this from happening again. I won't let what Erebus tried to do tear us apart. Michael exchanged a glance with Surziches before speaking again. That's a noble sentiment, Issei. But you must understand that with great power comes great responsibility. Your actions, your choices, they will be watched closely by all. You must be careful not to let your power overshadow the balance we fought so hard to maintain." Azazel smirked slightly. "What Michael means is, don't mess it up, kid. You've got the strength to change the world, but change isn't always easy." Issei smiled faintly, appreciating Azazel's bluntness. "I'll do everything I can to keep things balanced. I don't want to make anyone feel like they're in danger because of me." The room was quiet for a moment, the leaders deep in thought. Finally, Surziches spoke again, his voice calm but commanding. "We believe in you, Issei. You've proven yourself time and time again. But you must tread carefully. The future of the factions may depend on how you handle your role as the Dragon God Emperor." Issei nodded, feeling the weight of their trust on his shoulders. "I understand. I'll be careful. But I'll also do whatever it takes to protect the peace we've fought for." The meeting concluded soon after, and as Issei left the chamber, he felt a mix of relief and responsibility. The leaders had accepted his stance, but the road ahead was still uncertain. There would be more challenges, more enemies who would see his power as a threat. But as long as he had his friends by his side, Issei knew he could face whatever came next. Later that night, Issei stood on the balcony of the Grimmery mansion, looking up at the stars. Riaz joined him, her hand slipping into his as they gazed out at the night sky. "You've come a long way, Issei," Riaz said softly. "But I know this isn't the end. The world is still changing, and you're at the center of it." Issei smiled, squeezing her hand gently. "Yeah. I know there's still a lot to figure out. But as long as we're together, I think we'll be okay." Riaz rested her head on his shoulder, her warmth comforting. "We will be. You're not just the Dragon God Emperor, Issei. You're still the same person you've always been, the one who fights for what's right." Issei's heart swelled with love and gratitude as he looked down at Riaz. "I couldn't do any of this without you." She smiled up at him, her eyes filled with affection. "And you'll never have to." As they stood together under the stars, Issei felt a sense of peace wash over him. The battles they had fought, the enemies they had defeated, it had all led to this moment. And while the future was still uncertain, Issei knew that he wasn't facing it alone. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he was ready to face them. Because now, more than ever, he understood the true meaning of power. The days following the council meeting marked the beginning of a new chapter for the supernatural world. Issei had made his intentions clear. He would use his power not to dominate, but to protect and preserve the peace between the factions. His declaration, combined with the trust he had built with key leaders like Surziches, Michael, and Azazel, had helped ease some of the tensions that lingered after the battle with the True Devil Alliance. But unity wasn't something that could be achieved overnight. The deep-rooted fears and suspicions that had plagued the factions for centuries wouldn't simply vanish because of one battle, one victory, or one promise. As Issei stood in the heart of the underworld, overseeing the rebuilding efforts in the aftermath of the recent conflict, he couldn't help but feel the weight of the task ahead. Devils, angels, fallen angels, and even rogue dragons were slowly coming together to restore the damage, but there was still an undercurrent of mistrust. Old wounds didn't heal easily, and Issei knew that. "Issei." He turned to see Riaz approaching, her crimson hair flowing in the gentle breeze. She was dressed in her usual elegant attire, but there was a certain seriousness in her eyes that told him she was thinking the same thing. "The rebuilding is going well, but you can feel it, can't you?" she said quietly, standing beside him. "The factions are working together, but there's still so much uncertainty. They're waiting for someone to take the first step, waiting for someone to lead." Issei sighed, crossing his arms. "I know. I can feel the tension. Even though we stopped Urbus and the True Devil Alliance, there are still people who see me as a threat. They're waiting for me to make a mistake, to prove their fears right." Riaz nodded. "That's why you need to keep showing them who you really are. You've already done so much, but you need to do more. The factions need to see that you're not here to tear them apart, you're here to unite them." Issei looked at her, the weight of her words sinking in. She was right, as always. He had shown his strength in battle, but now it was time to show his strength as a leader. It wasn't enough to simply protect the factions from external threats, he had to help rebuild the trust that had been shattered over centuries of conflict. "I just don't know how to bring them all together," Issei admitted. "There's so much history between the factions. The devils, angels, fallen angels, even the dragons. They've all been fighting for so long. How do I convince them to trust each other?" Riaz smiled softly, her eyes filled with warmth. "You've already started, Issei. By showing them that you're willing to fight for peace, you've given them hope. Now, you just need to keep leading by example. If anyone can unite the factions, it's you." Issei felt a surge of determination. Riaz was right, he had come this far, and he couldn't stop now. The world was changing, and he had the power to shape that change. But he couldn't do it alone. The next day, Issei stood before a gathering of representatives from each faction. Devils, angels, fallen angels, and dragons filled the grand hall, their faces a mix of curiosity, caution, and, for some, fear. This meeting wasn't about battle, it was about forging a path forward, one that could finally bring true peace between the factions. Issei, Michael, and Azazel were seated at the front of the hall, their presence lending authority to the proceedings. They had been instrumental in organizing this gathering, and their support gave Issei the platform he needed to make his case. Issei stepped forward, the eyes of everyone in the room on him. He could feel the weight of their expectations, the hope and the doubt that lingered in the air. This was it, the moment where words would matter more than any battle. "I know many of you are uncertain about what the future holds," Issei began, his voice strong but calm. "I know that some of you see me as a threat, a destabilizing force that could upset the balance between the factions. But I'm here to tell you that my power isn't something to fear. It's something I intend to use to protect all of us, to protect the peace we've fought so hard to achieve." The room was silent as Issei continued, his eyes scanning the crowd. For centuries, the devils, angels, and fallen angels have been locked in a cycle of conflict. Even the dragons, who have stayed neutral for so long, have found themselves drawn into our battles. But we don't have to keep fighting. We have a chance to build something new, something better. Issei could see the doubt in some of their faces, but he pressed on. "I didn't ask for this power. I never wanted to be the Dragon God Emperor. But now that I am, I'm going to use it to make sure that no more innocent lives are lost to senseless wars. I'm not asking you to forget the past, but I am asking you to look toward the future. We've seen what happens when we let fear and hatred drive us. It's time to try something different." There were murmurs in the crowd, some of the representatives exchanging uneasy glances. But there were also nods of agreement, and Issei could feel a shift in the air. He had their attention. "I'm not asking for power. I'm not asking to rule over you," Issei said firmly. "What I'm asking for is unity. Let's work together, not as devils, angels, fallen angels, or dragons, but as beings who want the same thing: peace. Let's build a world where we don't have to fight each other, where we can trust each other." As Issei's words hung in the air, the room fell silent again. For a moment, it seemed like the uncertainty would win out, that fear would once again dictate the course of events. But then, Michael stood, his golden wings unfurling slightly as he stepped forward. "Issei speaks the truth," the leader of the angels said, his voice calm and authoritative. "We have fought for so long, but we cannot let the past control our future. We must be willing to embrace change, to work together for the sake of peace." Issei rose next, his crimson eyes gleaming with pride. "The devils stand with Issei. He has proven time and time again that he fights for what is right. If we are to move forward, we must do so together." Azazel, never one to miss an opportunity for levity, smirked as he stood. "Well, looks like the angels and devils agree on something. Guess that means I'm in too. But seriously, Issei's right. This is our chance to do things differently." But the support of the faction leaders, the tension in the room eased. Slowly, one by one, the representatives began to voice their agreement. There were still reservations, still doubts, but Issei had planted the seed of hope. And that was enough. After the meeting, Issei stood outside the grand hall, watching as the representatives dispersed. The sky above the underworld was clear, a rare moment of peace after so much turmoil. Riaz, Akeno, and the others joined him, their faces reflecting the same sense of cautious optimism. "You did it," Riaz said softly, standing beside him. "You gave them hope." Issei smiled, though there was still a weight on his shoulders. "It's a start, but there's still a long way to go. We've built a foundation, but now we need to prove that this unity can last." Akeno placed a hand on his shoulder, her usual teasing smile replaced with one of pride. "We'll help you, Issei. We're in this together." Issei looked at his friends, feeling a surge of gratitude. He wasn't alone in this. He never had been. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the landscape, Issei allowed himself a moment of peace. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, he felt hopeful. A new era of unity was within reach, and as long as they stood together, they could make it a reality. The underworld had never felt as serene as it did in the days following the summit. The once tense and uncertain atmosphere had begun to settle, and the factions, though still cautious, were slowly beginning to trust one another again. The promise of a united future, one without endless conflict, was starting to take root. Issei sat at the edge of a hill overlooking a vast valley. The landscape was a blend of red skies and dark plains, a signature of the underworld, but it felt different now. The air wasn't heavy with tension, nor was it filled with the echoes of war. It was peaceful. Behind him, Riaz approached, her crimson hair gleaming under the soft light of the setting sun. She sat beside him, resting her hand on his, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. They simply sat together, soaking in the calm. "You've done it, Issei," Riaz said after a while, her voice gentle. "You brought the factions together. You've given them hope for peace. I always knew you could." Issei smiled, though his eyes remained fixed on the horizon. "It wasn't just me. You were with me every step of the way. So were the others. I couldn't have done any of this alone." Riaz chuckled softly. You never had to do it alone. That's what makes you different from the others, Issei. You've always fought for everyone, not just yourself. That's why they follow you. Issei's heart swelled with gratitude. He had never sought power for its own sake. From the very beginning, all he had wanted was to protect the people he loved, to keep them safe from harm. But along the way, he had been given a mantle of responsibility that was far greater than anything he had ever imagined. As the Dragon God Emperor, the weight of the world had fallen on his shoulders. But now, looking out at the peaceful landscape, he knew it had all been worth it. The factions were united, and while there would always be challenges, they had taken the first step toward a future where they didn't have to fight one another. For the first time in centuries, there was a real chance at lasting peace. Do you think it'll last? Issei asked, turning to Riaz. The peace, I mean. Riaz smiled, her eyes filled with warmth. I think it will. There will always be people who resist change, who cling to the past. But you've given them something to believe in. You've shown them that things can be different. That's all anyone can ask for. Issei nodded, his gaze returning to the horizon. He had fought so many battles, both physical and emotional, to reach this point. The path ahead would still be difficult, but for the first time, he felt truly at peace with his role as the Dragon God Emperor. Later that evening, a celebration was held in the Gremory mansion. Representatives from the devils, angels, fallen angels, and dragons gathered together in a rare display of unity. The halls were filled with laughter and conversation, and the weight of the past seemed to lift, if only for a moment. Issei stood with Riaz, Akeno, Kaneko, and the rest of his peerage, watching as the factions mingled. It was surreal to see devils and angels standing side by side, discussing plans for cooperation rather than strategies for war. Dragons, once isolated and distant, were now integrated into the conversation, their presence a reminder of the power that had been united under Issei's leadership. It's strange, isn't it? Akeno said with a smile. To see everyone here, together like this. It feels like something out of a dream. Issei nodded, his eyes scanning the room. Yeah, it does. But it's real. We made it real. Kaneko, always blunt, added, there will still be challenges. Not everyone is happy about this peace. But we'll face it. Issei smiled at her. We've faced worse. As long as we stick together, we can handle whatever comes next. As the evening continued, Surziches approached Issei, a glass of wine in his hand and a proud smile on his face. You've come a long way, Issei. When I first met you, I never imagined you'd rise to become one of the most important figures in the supernatural world. Issei rubbed the back of his neck sheepishly. Yeah, I didn't imagine it either. I'm still not sure how I ended up here. Surziches chuckled. Sometimes, fate has a way of choosing the right person for the job. You've proven yourself time and time again, Issei. You've earned the respect of everyone here, and more importantly, you've earned their trust. Issei felt a sense of pride swell within him. Coming from Surziches, one of the most powerful and respected figures in the underworld, those words meant everything. As Surziches turned to join the rest of the leaders, Issei found himself standing alone for a moment, reflecting on the journey that had led him here. The battles, the victories, the losses, it had all shaped him into the person he had become. But through it all, one thing had remained constant. His desire to protect the people he loved. Riaz appeared at his side once more, slipping her hand into his. What are you thinking about? She asked softly. Issei smiled at her. Just everything. How far we've come. How much we've been through. Riaz rested her head on his shoulder, her voice warm and comforting. It hasn't been easy. But we're here now. Together. Issei wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. Yeah. Together. The next morning, Issei stood outside the Gremory mansion, the early morning light casting a soft glow over the landscape. The celebration had ended, but the feeling of unity lingered. As he gazed out at the peaceful scene before him, Issei felt a sense of calm wash over him. He had finally found balance not just in the world around him, but within himself. He was no longer just the Red Dragon Emperor or the protector of his peerage. He was the Dragon God Emperor, a being with the power to unite the supernatural world and protect the peace they had fought so hard to achieve. And yet, despite the power he held, Issei knew that he was still the same person he had always been. The same boy who had started this journey with a desire to protect those he loved. The power hadn't changed him. It had only given him the tools to do what he had always set out to do. Riaz joined him once again, her presence as comforting as ever. What now? She asked, her eyes filled with love. Issei smiled, his heart light. Now, we build the future. Together. As they stood side by side, watching the sun rise over the underworld, Issei knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The world was at peace, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Issei allowed himself to believe that it could last. Because the Dragon God Emperor wasn't just a title. It was a promise. A promise to protect. A promise to unite. And a promise to always fight for peace. End of the here. So that's it for today's video guys. Before you go, just like the video and share it with your friends. Bye.